Children are one of the most vulnerable groups in conflict. 25 years have passed since the adoption of Resolutions 12 and 61, which established the Security Council toolkit to prevent and end violations against children. However, this year, the report of the Secretary General of the United Nations recorded a 35% increase in the number of children killed and maimed. The reasons for this sudden increase are obvious to all. Two-thirds of the victims of Israel's military operations in the Gaza Strip are women and children. In the Israeli-Palestinian conflict zone, we have witnessed all 6 grave violations. For children, the scale is terrible. The situation in the press is a major child protection challenge for the entire international community. We mourn the Israeli children who were killed or injured on October 7th. The violence they suffered was unjustifiable. But these victims do not justify Israel's violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza. Dozens of children have been killed and maimed in Gaza every day since October last year. According to preliminary figures alone, more than 13,000 children have died, 1,000 have disappeared under the rubble of destroyed buildings, and more than 20,000 have been orphaned. The bodies of minors have been found in mass graves throughout the enclave. Children are not only killed by Israeli rocket attacks, residential areas, schools, hospitals, mosques, refugee camps, at UN facilities where they seek refuge in vain. They starve to death. Dehydration is more beneficial. The 1,000 workers continue to be at risk trying to save the children of Gaza and alleviate their suffering. More than 50,000 children are in urgent need of assistance due to acute malnutrition. But they are unable to receive the assistance they need because Israel has effectively blocked humanitarian access, depriving Gazans, the last hope of survival. The education and health sectors were destroyed. Children born and raised under occupation have no hope of the future. The situation is no better in the West Bank, where violations have also increased dramatically, including the killing and maiming of minors arbitrarily detained in Israeli prisons, torture and other forms of ill treatment, including violence against all. The number of violations cited in the report is more than 8,000, which is shocking. Only confirmed cases are several times higher than in other conflict situations. But even more striking is the 23,000 violations that have yet to be verified. We expect him to devote all his energy and means to restoring the whole picture of what is happening, and to hold all those responsible accountable. I think it should be an honor for the United Nations to be General Stolled. Russia, like the entire international community, will pay close attention to this work. However, the most important thing is that a ceasefire must be achieved as soon as possible. Only in this way can we avoid new casualties and ensure the provision of necessary humanitarian assistance. Mr. President, the supply of Western weapons is one of the most serious factors that lead to and exacerbate conflicts and cause civilian casualties, including children. As we all know, many of the weapons supplied by the West cannot be used without appropriate assistance, including targeting. We are talking about Ukraine, where weapons supplied by the West, mainly the United States, are mainly used against civilians, including children in Russian regions. Just a few days ago, on June 23rd, the Kiev regime committed another heinous terrorist crime against civilians in Sevastopol. 5 people, including 2 children, including a 2-year-old, were killed in an attack on a beach in Sevastopol. Total number of victims. There were as many as 151 people, including 27 children, many of whom were in serious condition. The killing was carried out using American MC attack missiles equipped with cluster warheads. In addition, Mikhail Podolyak, an advisor to the head of Zelensky's office, said that Crimea does not have and cannot have beaches and tourist areas. End quote. He sees Crimea as a barracks. As a result, Kiev signed that it intended to attack civilian objects, including those where children were. However, we did not hear his condemnation of the attack. This is far from a case where Western weapons have killed and suffered children in Ukraine and Russia. However, the formation did not find any violations against children by the Ukrainian armed forces, which should be reflected in the Secretary General's report. It effectively ignores the fact that serious and systematic violations of international humanitarian law by Ukraine, which began in 2014, continue. Daily shelling of peaceful neighborhoods, life support facilities, civilian infrastructure. This is the way the Kiev regime operates. Attacks on civilian targets in various parts of Russia were carried out with the help of kamikaze drones and multiple rocket systems in the village. The signature handwriting of Ukrainian formations is attacks on civilian cars, including those carrying children. Armed formations controlled by the Kiev regime deliberately attacked civilian objects, schools, kindergartens, and medical institutions. You are responsible for the death of 192 children and the injury of 550 children in the Russian Federation between February 22nd and April 24th alone. They are also responsible for the deaths of 129 unicorns of 500 lives to 3 children in Donbass between 2014 and 2022. Here are just a few episodes. On December 30th, Ukraine shelled a celebration site in Belgorod, where a New Year's tree and an ice rink were located, killing 5 children. On February 15th this year, a 1-year-old girl was killed in a Ukrainian shelling of a school stadium. On July 20th, a Ukrainian drone attack in Crimea left a child with fatal shrapnel injuries. In 2023 alone, more than 1,000 medical and educational institutions in Russia were destroyed or damaged. Since February 2022, Ukrainian forces have carried out more than 1,625 attacks on civilian infrastructure in 28 regions of the Russian Federation. 10 of them were not entirely minors. Russian authorities have documented all the crimes committed by the Kiev regime. The Parliamentary Committee to investigate crimes against children in Kiev continues its work. The 2023 report of the Committee on Crimes Against Children in Kiev is available on the website of the Russian Federation Council. However, in the General's report, you try to find plots, figures, but do not reflect. Apparently, Russian children are not interested in him and do not need protection. Here, we would like to draw attention to one of the most serious performance failures in terms of efficiency. United Nations Child Protection Mechanism, politicized. Only politicization can explain the absence of bycatch in the list of parties. Responsibility for violations against children of the Ukrainian armed forces. Does the Sun Joint Violation Prevention Plan really allow Kiev to murder and maim Russian children? Only politicization can explain the presence of the Russian armed forces on this list. It is important to emphasize here that the number of violations attributed to Russia in the report has not been verified in an independent way. Their source, known Kopachev Mission, Kiev, it is controlled by the Ukrainian authorities and receives data from the following sources. Russia has no access to details of this information for verification purposes, nor has it provided us with these details. But even on the basis of these unverified data, there are positive developments. But this does not lead to a decision to remove the list. Despite this, Russia is committed to protecting children in armed conflict, especially in special military operations.
Все это время мы демонстрировали открытость к взаимодействию с ООН по данному вопросу, в частности, со спецпредставителем Генерального секретаря по детям и вооруженным конфликтам. Господин председатель, в завершении хотели бы остановиться на том, что...
Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to point out that children continue to be particularly threatened by terrorist and extremist groups involved in armed conflict.
Для них излюбленным методом является вербовка детей...
For them, their favorite method is to recruit abducted children for violent sex, using their human shields to create obstacles to the delivery of humanitarian aid. The Sahara-Sahel region, particularly Mali and the Central African Republic, is the most difficult region to deal with from the perspective of terrorist threats. In Afghanistan, Syria, and Myanmar, armed groups such as the so-called People's Defense Forces continue to attack schools and brutally kill entire families and children. However, the information provided by the Burmese government has been ignored. In Syria, territory not controlled by Damascus looks like the northeast of the country. Since the beginning of the year, the Kursk formation has kidnapped more than 5 Syrian children for recruitment. For years, the catastrophic situation in the Al-Hulay camp for displaced persons in Rai has not been resolved, with 29,000 children, most of them under the age of 12. This is the largest number of juveniles arbitrarily detained in the world. However, we do not see any appeal in the report against the United States, the occupying power that controls the camps. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement.